Now I'm joined by our special guest, Mr. Tom Shatel. How you doing, my friend?
How are you, sir?
Dude, I'm doing great. I'm excited. First time I've ever had the pleasure to interview you. So I'll go ahead and ask you. You actually just wrote, after watching Scott Frost's introductory press conference there at UCF, you wrote an article about it, kind of talking about, and obviously you can elaborate more, basically Frost was probably a little bit conflicted between feeling obligated to come home versus being happy there in UCF. But go ahead. What are your thoughts on Frost, UCF, and his introductory press conference?
Well, I'm very happy for him. Obviously didn't work out here. It's 2020 hindsight, but I've been great at that my whole career. So why stop now? I really think that, as I recall, doing all the interviews when he came to Nebraska 7 years ago, 2017, the end of that season, he kept talking about how much he loved Orlando and the school and coaching those players, and it didn't sound like a guy, a normal coach who was changing jobs, especially to come home. And I remember the press conference was not like a celebration. It was for a lot of people, the people in the audience, but for the guy on the stage, it wasn't quite. It just felt like he felt like he had to do it. Maybe he didn't necessarily want to do it. He could have turned. There's no way he could have turned that down. And the athletic director, Bill Moose, had to offer to him. Had to. But looking back, he wasn't ready. He didn't bring Nebraska is a big, big job. And the staff he brought wasn't ready. You probably, for a guy who had 2 years of head coaching experience, maybe he could have surrounded himself with some older assistants or coordinators who'd kind of been through the Big Ten. See, I don't think Scott really understood what the Big Ten was. I know I didn't when I got here. And so I just think there were a lot of lessons to learn. They get off on the wrong foot with the weather. Martinez gets hurt. They lose close games. Scott talks about how he's, they better get us now, and this game's winnable. And it's just one thing after another, and a lot of close games. And then COVID happens. Adam, I just feel like it was kind of star-crossed. And I felt like, just watching him at UCF, I think the irony is he's one of the all-time Huskers, and he grew up in Nebraska, and he'll be a Husker fan for life. But irony maybe is that he's a better fit at UCF.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he does down there. Obviously, they're excited to have him back. I'm sure he's excited to be back down there as well. So kind of transitioning to a little bit more Husker-specific stuff, Nebraska is seen as a major player by other schools, players, and agents as far as being a spot to come because of the NIL that we can offer. We have legit NIL that we can potentially offer here to prospective players. What are your thoughts on how important it is, especially with some of the guys we've had enter the transfer portal on our end, and assuming none of them come back, because some might. Okay, we've already seen Emmett come back. But let's say, how important do you think it is that we nail certain positions, whether it be wide receiver, defensive line, etc., when it comes to bringing in guys via the portal?
Yeah, Adam, you can certainly speak to this more than I can as a former player, but I just I'm amazed, and maybe I shouldn't be amazed. I'm probably naive, but at how much money is important to these guys, and how much they're doing everything for money, and not necessarily playing time or the program or the coach. It's kind of eye-opening for me in a way. Maybe I'm naive on that, but as far as Nebraska goes, they need to get that offense. I think across the board they need more speed and more sort of the playmakers. We used to, back in the day, Barry Switzer used to call them difference makers. I got more difference makers than Tom, so we're going to win. And now they call them dudes. Well, Nebraska needs more dudes. And defense, offense. I like the way the offensive line played after Holgerson got here. I'm not so. I think there's probably a correlation there. I like the way the offense played, but they, the receivers they have to improve the receiving room. The running backs are good if they can add to it. More power to them. I think, but I just think Daniel Holgerson has a very specific idea what he wants, and I think he's going to go. I think once the portal continues to open and he's able to go look at. I mean, it's very fascinating to I think now that the portal is really in full gear, and Holgerson's an assistant, a coordinator, that he can just focus on the one thing, not being a head coach. That I think having Holgerson and Raiola together as recruiters for offensive skill, the skilled people, especially receivers, ought to be really good for Nebraska. So, but defensively, we don't know who the coordinator is going to be, and I think that the sooner maybe but I guess Matt Rule is kind of defensive core. He's a defense guy, and he knows what he wants on defense. So in terms of getting the linebackers, it's just it sure seems like the pass rush needs to get built back up. For next year, that's going to be a priority too. So I guess the answer to the question is everywhere.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because you make a lot of good points, but when you talk about money playing such a big factor, Nick Saban has come out and said he was going to come back and coach, but when he was doing some meetings with players as far as next year, the first thing they said is, how much are you going to pay me? How much are you going to pay me? And it was so different to what he was used to, the way he built Alabama. He's like, I can't do this the way that's worked for me for years anymore. And he's now on ESPN and doing a great job there. And I'm actually curious, because you're a guy who has seen and covered a lot of things, and you've got as much experience as anybody. And so you, Big 8, Big 12, Big 10, now the Big 18, even though we're still called the Big 10, like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, somebody said, hey, this is what college football is going to look like. Like Oregon's going to win the Big 10 championship. The Pac-10 is not going to be around anymore. There's going to be this thing called NIL, and then you can enter this thing called the portal where you can transfer 2 times a year for 5 years. So basically 10 times in your career. Like, are you surprised? Could you have ever envisioned, and I'm not even knocking it, there's certain things I don't like about college football, but as a whole, I still love the game. Could you have ever envisioned this like 10, 25 years ago even?
No, not even 10 or 5. My first question would have been, wow, did the NCAA, did they go out of business? Because how could they have let all this happen? And they did. They just sat back and watched. They basically were out of business. They weren't minding the store. And there had to be, rail guards, whatever they call them, rules to this stuff. And there weren't. When you could transfer, how many times would you be immediately eligible? And they felt like they were going to lose everything, every one of these cases in court. So they didn't even try. It's in the conference realignment is, somebody I really trust in college athletics told me about when Nebraska went to the Big Ten. They said, this is going to eventually, it's just going to get worse and worse because everybody's chasing money. Then it's going to blow up. It's going to explode, and we're going to go back to the way it was. I can't wait for that. I haven't seen it yet, but it's madness. Look, I made no secret. I don't like the Big Ten or how big it is, or it's not a conference. It's a corporation, and I don't like USC in this league. I think that there should be a West Coast league. There should be a Pac-12. There should be a Big 8 and a Big 10. There should be an SEC and an ACC and all the rest. And I don't know how we get back to it. I don't think we're done. Although everything I've heard about Florida State and Clemson is they're not wanted in the Big Ten or SEC. They may have to stay where they are, which could be awkward. But so maybe they're. I think North Carolina is going to be somebody that the Big Ten and SEC want.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I don't know. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it was hard enough for me to go to from the Big 12 to the Big 10. I don't. Just watching this stuff is wild. It's just. And then the playoff, we're arguing about the playoff, just like we used to argue about the AP and the UPI poll. So, but I can't wait for the playoff. How about you?
I'm actually very excited. The next segment I'm going to make some tweaks. I'm going to give my thoughts on how it could potentially be improved. You know what's crazy though? The poor old Pac-10 and Pac-12. Oregon goes and wins the Big Ten. Arizona State, also a former Pac-12 school, as you know, goes and wins the Big 12. It's just craziness. And you make a great point. The Big Ten is a corporation. Our commissioner has a background in television deals. That's why he's where he's at. So you make a phenomenal point. I really enjoyed you coming on today, Tom. Thank you for your time.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, sir. Thanks.
All right, have a great day.